I never believed in ghost stories. I always thought they were just tales meant to scare kids or entertain those looking for a thrill. But everything changed on my last shift. It wasn't a ghost story, it was real, and it still haunts me every night. My name is Marcus, and this is what happened during my final night working at the old Carlisle Motel, a place where even the walls seemed to whisper secrets. I had taken the job at the Carlisle Motel purely out of necessity. After college, life didn't pan out as I'd hoped, and I found myself working odd shifts at a rundown motel on the outskirts of a small town. The place was a relic, a building with faded neon signs, creaking floors, and an air of loneliness that settled in like dust. The locals told stories about the motel's dark past, missing guests, unexplained noises, and lights flickering in abandoned rooms. I'd always dismissed them as exaggerations by superstitious small-town folks. I needed the money, and I believed I was just being paranoid. But even in those early days, I felt something was off about Carlisle. The air always felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. It wasn't until I met Mrs. Carlisle, the elderly widow who claimed to be the original owner's daughter, that I started to understand there might be more truth behind those stories. With her tired eyes and trembling hands, she'd warned me. Some nights, the motel remembers. I never quite grasped what she meant until that fateful night. It was a chilly autumn evening when I clocked in for what would become the most unforgettable night of my life. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and a thick fog began to roll in from the highway. I arrived at the motel, keys in hand, and turned on the flickering neon sign. The sign buzzed weakly as it illuminated the peeling facade of the building. As I stepped inside, I could hear the echo of my footsteps against the empty lobby floor. The reception area was dusty and dimly lit, a relic of another time. I double-checked the front desk log, noting the few reservations for the night. It was going to be slow, a perfect opportunity for a quiet, uneventful shift. But I knew better than to let my guard down at a place like this. I set up the security monitors in the lobby, making sure the cameras in every corridor were functioning. The motel had an outdated system, but it was enough to keep an eye on any late-night wanderers. I even kept a flashlight and a small bat, just in case things got out of hand. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, even when I was the only one working. About an hour into my shift, the night began its slow, insidious transformation. The clock ticked past 10 p.m., and I settled into my routine, answering the phone, checking in guests, and patrolling the hallways. The motel was quiet, almost too quiet. Every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the hum of the old refrigerator in the back office, felt amplified. While doing my rounds, I passed by room 12. The door was slightly ajar, though it should have been locked. I paused, my heart pounding a little faster. I remembered Mrs. Carlisle's warning. Some nights, the motel remembers. I pushed the door open gently, half expecting to see nothing but a dusty, empty room. Instead, the room was dark and cold, the air thick with a strange metallic scent. I scanned the space with my flashlight, and then I noticed it, a mirror on the wall, its surface clouded by age. In the dim beam of my light, I thought I saw a faint, blurred reflection of someone standing behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. I chalked it up to my imagination running wild in the gloom and left the room, locking the door behind me. But that brief moment of inexplicable dread lingered in my mind. The hours dragged on. Around midnight, I settled at the front desk with a cup of lukewarm coffee. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through social media on my phone, but every so often, I felt the prickling sensation of being watched. The motel, with its history and all its secrets, seemed to come alive in the dark. At one point, I heard a faint humming sound coming from the corridor. It was soft, almost like a lullaby, but completely out of place in the silent building. I left the desk and followed the sound down the hallway, trying to trace its origin. The humming led me to room 7, another room that should have been empty. I knocked gently, but there was no answer, only the soft, eerie melody that seemed to echo off the walls. I hesitated, then slowly turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was empty, save for an old rocking chair that moved slightly, as if it had just been sat in. I stopped in my tracks, my pulse racing. I reached out to steady the chair, half expecting it to come alive, but nothing happened. The humming ceased as quickly as it had started. I closed the door, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it just a draft, a faulty heater, or something else entirely? I returned to the front desk, more unsettled than before. Every shadow now felt like it could hide a secret, every sound a hidden warning. I decided to check the security footage from the lobby cameras. I sat down at the old computer, its screen grainy but serviceable. I rewound the footage to the time I'd noticed the door to room 12 was open. As I watched, I saw the corridor empty until a dark figure slowly appeared near the room. The figure was shrouded in shadow, moving with deliberate slowness. It paused in front of the room, almost as if waiting for something. The figure then turned and disappeared down the hall. I rewound and watched again. There was no doubt about it. Something was moving through the motel, something that shouldn't be there. My heart pounded in my chest. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a guest or a maintenance worker I hadn't heard about. But deep down, I knew the answer was more sinister. I remembered the old tales about the Carlisle Motel, about the strange occurrences and unsolved mysteries that had plagued the building for decades. I shuddered, feeling the chill of dread settle in my bones. Just as I was about to call my supervisor to report the incident, the phone at the front desk rang. The line was scratchy, and I could barely make out a whisper on the other end. "Help. Please, leave." The voice was weak, almost drowned out by static, but it sent a surge of terror through me. I fumbled with the receiver, my hands trembling. When I finally managed to listen, all I heard was a barely audible plea before the line went dead. I looked around the empty lobby, feeling as if I were being pulled into a nightmare. I didn't know who had called or if it was even real, but in that moment, I felt utterly alone and deeply, inexplicably vulnerable. The rest of the night became a blur of tension and fear. I kept my flashlight and phone close, monitoring the hallways and checking the security cameras every few minutes. The quiet that once felt peaceful had turned oppressive, as though the darkness itself was closing in around me. At around 1:30 a.m., I received a text from an unknown number. "Don't trust the shadows." My blood ran cold. Who could be texting me at this hour? I debated calling the number back, but my gut told me not to. I replied with a single word, "Who?" and then waited. Nothing. The silence was more terrifying than any answer. I returned to my rounds, trying to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of the wind outside was a potential threat. As I passed by room 10, I noticed that the window was slightly open, even though I distinctly remembered closing it earlier. I walked over and peered out into the foggy night. The trees swayed in the breeze, their branches like bony fingers reaching out. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure moving among the trees. I blinked and looked again, but there was nothing there, only the cold, empty darkness. I continued down the hall, my senses on high alert. Then I heard it, a soft scraping sound, like nails against wood, coming from one of the storage closets. I crept closer, every step measured and silent. I reached out and slowly opened the closet door. Inside, Nothing but old cleaning supplies and a dusty mirror stared back at me. Yet in the reflection, I saw a flash of movement behind me, a dark shape that vanished as quickly as it appeared. My breath caught in my throat, and I slammed the door shut, backing away until I was certain I wasn't being watched. At 2 a.m., I thought I might finally have a chance to collect my thoughts and calm down. I locked the front door and retreated to the back office, trying to review the security footage again. But when I rewound to the earlier events, I saw something that froze me in my seat. In the hallway outside room 7, where the humming had been, a shadowy figure was visible. It stood unnaturally still, its form barely discernible against the darkness. I rewound and watched again. It moved slowly, almost as if it were gliding, until it reached the end of the corridor where the light disappeared. My mind rezzed with questions. Who or what was that? And why had it come here tonight? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something far beyond a simple case of trespassing or mischief. The motel, with all its secrets, had awakened something, a presence that was watching, waiting, and slowly closing in. As I sat there, staring at the screen, I heard footsteps approaching behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my ears. There was no one there. The office was empty. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or if something unseen was lurking just beyond the reach of my vision. I needed answers. I remembered the stories Mrs. Carlisle had told me years ago about guests who disappeared without a trace and nights when the motel seemed to come alive. In a desperate attempt to understand what was happening, I pulled out my phone and called my best friend, Aaron. He wasn't just a friend. He was the one person who'd always believed in the supernatural, always willing to listen to the unexplainable. "Marcus, what's going on?" Aaron asked, his voice low and concerned. I explained everything: the open doors, the strange humming, the text message, the shadow in the hallway, and the odd figure I'd seen on the security camera. Aaron listened intently, his silence speaking volumes. When I finished, he said, "I think you need to leave, Marcus. This place, it's not what it seems. There's a darkness here that has been fed by years of misery, loneliness, and pain. The motel is alive, and it's hungry." I tried to laugh it off, but deep down, his words resonated with the chill that had settled in my bones. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in the middle of something far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. Every minute felt like an eternity as I patrolled the halls. I noticed strange symbols carved into the wooden banisters, almost as if someone had been trying to ward off the darkness. The air smelled of decay and something acrid, like burning incense mixed with the stench of old blood. At around 3:15 a.m., I was near the back entrance when I heard a low, guttural whisper coming from the darkened corridor. The voice was unintelligible, yet filled with a sense of urgency and despair. I couldn't tell if it was coming from behind a closed door or from the very walls themselves. My flashlight beam trembled as I followed the sound, which led me to a storage room I'd never seen before. The door was hidden behind a stack of old crates, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. I pushed the crates aside and opened the door. Inside was a small room, illuminated only by a single, flickering bulb. The walls were covered in old photographs and newspaper clippings. My eyes were drawn to one particular clipping, a black and white photo of a family, their faces drawn and haunted. Beneath the photo was a headline: "Tragedy at Carlisle Motel. Family vanishes without a trace." I remembered Mrs. Carlisle mentioning a terrible incident decades ago when a family disappeared under mysterious circumstances. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I sifted through the clippings and discovered more details: a fire that never happened, voices recorded on old tapes, and whispered rumors of a curse that had plagued the motel for generations. I realized that every unexplained event of the night was part of a larger, sinister story. The motel wasn't just a building, it was a vessel for lost souls, a repository for dark memories that refused to die. The whispering grew louder, and I felt as if unseen hands were reaching out to grab me. I stepped back, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. That's when I saw it. A dark shape reflected in one of the dusty mirrors on the wall. It wasn't a person, but something that resembled a face, twisted in agony, its eyes pleading silently for help. I couldn't look away. It felt as if the spirit was trying to communicate, to warn me of the doom that awaited. I left the room, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. I knew I had to get out, but the thought of leaving my post filled me with dread. What if I left and the darkness followed? What if I was the next victim of the motel's curse? I decided to return to the lobby and make one final call to the local authorities. I dialed 911, my hands shaking as I explained the bizarre events unfolding at the motel. The operator's calm, measured tone did little to ease my mounting panic. They promised to send someone, but by the time I hung up, I knew that help was too far away on a night like this. As I walked back down the hallway, I felt the presence again, the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. The walls seemed to close in, the flickering lights casting long, twisting shadows that danced mockingly around me. I passed by room 4, and for a moment, I could swear I heard the sound of laughter, a hollow, despairing sound that echoed from the past. I quickened my pace, the sound echoing in my ears like a funeral dirge. At 3:45 a.m., I reached the front desk. The security monitor showed the empty lobby, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it was just the stress of the night playing tricks on me. But then, the monitor flickered, and for an instant, I saw a figure standing in the corner of the lobby, a figure I hadn't noticed before. I stared at the screen, but when I looked up, there was nothing there. My skin crawled with dread. I gathered my things, determined to stay until the end of my shift. I didn't want to abandon the motel until I knew what was happening. I locked the front door and sat at the desk, eyes glued to the monitor, waiting for any sign of movement. The minutes ticked by slowly, each second heavier than the last. Then, at 4:10 a.m., it happened. The power flickered, and the entire building was plunged into darkness. The monitors went blank, and the silence was absolute. A heavy, suffocating silence that swallowed every sound. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow path through the inky black. I could hear my own heart pounding, loud enough to drown out every rational thought. As I stood there, the darkness seemed to breathe. I heard soft footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. I could feel a cold presence right behind me. I spun around, the beam of my flashlight shaking wildly, but I saw nothing, only the swirling darkness and the echo of my own fear. Then, I heard the whisper again. This time it was clear, and it wasn't coming from a hidden corner or behind a door. It was right beside me. Marcus, help me. The voice was faint but desperate, filled with a sorrow that pierced my soul. I couldn't ignore it. I moved forward, each step hesitant, until I reached the storage room door again. I pushed it open and stepped inside, my light falling on a small figure huddled in the far corner. It was a young girl, no more than 8 years old, her eyes wide with terror. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, as if she belonged to another era. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "They won't let me go," she sobbed. "They keep me here. I'm trapped." Her voice broke, and I could see the deep despair in her eyes. I knelt beside her, trying to offer comfort, but as I did, I heard a loud crash from the hallway. The sound was like 1,000 shattering glass pieces, and it shook the very foundation of the motel. I grabbed the girl and ran out into the corridor, her small hand clutched tightly in mine. The hallway was a maze of shadows, the walls groaning as if in pain. I could feel the presence of something chasing us, something ancient and malevolent. The air was filled with whispers, incoherent, yet filled with malice. I didn't know where to run. Every door I tried was locked. Every corridor led to dead ends. I finally reached the stairwell, my heart pounding so hard it felt as if it would burst. I raced down the stairs, the sound of footsteps echoing behind me, growing louder and more frantic. As I reached the ground floor, the front door was still locked. I pounded on it, desperate for escape, but the door wouldn't budge. Behind me, the whispers grew into a cacophony, and I felt icy fingers brushing against my back. I turned, my flashlight beam revealing nothing but swirling darkness. I could hear the heavy, deliberate breathing of something unseen, and I knew that whatever was chasing me was closing in. I ran back into the lobby, the girl still in my arms. I could see the outlines of figures in the dim emergency lights, shadows with no discernible features, yet undeniably human. Their eyes, if they had any, glowed with a terrible hunger. I realized with a sickening certainty that the motel wasn't just haunted by memories. It was haunted by souls, trapped in an endless cycle of pain and despair. I managed to force open a side door and stumbled out into the cold night air. The fog was thicker now, wrapping around me like a shroud. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. I jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, not daring to look back. The engine roared to life, and I sped off into the night, the cries of the lost echoing in my ears. I haven't returned to the Carlisle Motel since that night. I tried to forget, to convince myself it was just a nightmare, born of exhaustion and fear. But the memories are too vivid, the terror too real. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear a whisper on the wind, calling my name, as if reminding me that I can never truly escape what happened. I learned something that night. The darkness is never far behind, and some places hold secrets that should remain buried. The motel, with its haunted corridors and tragic past, was a living nightmare. And I know now that if you ever find yourself working a night shift in a place like that, always trust your gut, because when the shadows whisper and the darkness moves, you might just find that the nightmares are real. And sometimes, the past isn't dead. It never really leaves. It lingers, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to listen. I share this story not as a ghost story for entertainment, but as a warning. There are places where the line between the living and the dead blurs, where the past reaches out to claim the present. I'm still haunted by what I saw that night, by the chilling cries of that little girl, and the cold, unyielding darkness that followed me home. If you ever find yourself alone during a late shift, if you hear strange whispers or see figures in the corner of your eye, remember my story. Sometimes the only way to survive is to run and never look back.